She handed me the divorce papers the same week I sold my car to pay for her father's surgery. I remember the pen trembling in her hand as she slid the folder across the table. There was no guilt in her eyes, just exhaustion, maybe even relief. Outside, the rain kept tapping against the window, steady and cold, like the sound of everything I'd built washing away. I asked her why. She didn't even look up. Because, Ethan. I can't do this anymore. I need more out of life. That word, more, echoed long after she left. More than love. More than loyalty. More than the man who gave up everything for her. I sat there in the dark, staring at the divorce papers, the faint smell of hospital disinfectant still clinging to my clothes. She thought I'd beg her to stay, but that was the last mistake she'd ever make. I met Lena during my second year of college. She was the kind of person who filled every room she walked into, laughing too loudly, speaking too quickly, and somehow making everyone else slow down just to catch up with her energy. I was the quiet one. The guy who spent nights buried in blueprints and textbooks, chasing a degree in mechanical engineering because it was practical, not because it was exciting. She noticed me one rainy afternoon in the library. My umbrella had broken on the way there, and I was dripping wet, trying not to ruin the floor with puddles. She laughed and handed me a napkin, of all things. "Here, future engineer," she said. "Design yourself a better umbrella." That was Lena, always teasing, always light. I didn't know it then, but that laugh would be the soundtrack to the best years of my life. We fell into rhythm easily. Late-night ramen after exams, sharing earbuds under streetlights, pretending the world was just the two of us. She'd dream big, always talking about brands she'd work for, the people she'd meet, the cities she'd conquer. I was content building things with my hands, small gadgets, prototypes, anything that kept me grounded. But she made me dream bigger too. Once, on a rainy night, we stood outside a small cafe, the neon lights flickering against the wet pavement. She looked at me, water running down her cheeks, and said, "You're my home, Ethan. No matter how far I go." I smiled, brushing her hair back. "Then don't forget where home is." She didn't answer, but she kissed me like she meant it. Back then, I believed she did. After college, life moved fast. I landed a decent engineering job at a small firm, while Lena joined a PR agency in the city. She was brilliant at it, confident, persuasive, magnetic. Within a year, she'd become one of their youngest senior associates. I couldn't have been prouder. But our lives started orbiting different worlds. I came home with grease-stained hands and stories about circuit boards, she came home with champagne headaches and stories about networking events. Yet somehow, we still found our way back to each other at night. We rented a modest apartment near her grandfather's house. Mr. Howard was old-fashioned, a retired history teacher with a sharp tongue but a soft heart. He didn't approve of most of Lena's boyfriends back in the day, but he liked me immediately. "You're not trying to impress anyone," he'd said the first day we met. "That's rare these days." He became family to me long before I signed the papers that made it official. There were sacrifices, of course. I turned down a higher-paying job in another city because Lena's career was taking off locally. She didn't ask me to stay, but the way she smiled when I told her I'd decided to remain made the decision easy. We built a life together. Sunday breakfasts with burnt toast and too much coffee. Movie nights with her falling asleep on my shoulder halfway through. Trips to visit Mr. Howard, who'd always insist we take leftovers home. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Or so I thought. The first small distance came like a shadow, barely noticeable at first. She started working later, her phone always buzzing with urgent messages. But even then, I told myself it was normal. Ambition was part of who she was. I remember one night in particular. She came home after midnight, exhausted, her mascara slightly smudged. I heated up leftovers for her while she kicked off her heels. "You work too hard," I told her softly. She smiled faintly. You know me. I can't stop until I get where I want to be. I leaned against the counter, studying her. And where's that? She looked at me then, eyes unfocused, almost sad. I'm not sure yet. She kissed me goodnight and disappeared into the bedroom. I stood there for a while, the hum of the microwave still echoing in the silence. Looking back now, I think that was the first crack. The moment I realized that love isn't always lost in a fight or a scream, it can fade in silence, in the space between two people who once shared everything. But at the time, I didn't see it. I was too busy loving her. Too busy trying to hold on to the version of her that used to look at me like I was enough. And maybe, deep down, I already knew that version was slipping away. It started small, just a change in rhythm. Lena began staying later at the office, her text messages becoming shorter, her tone a little more distracted. At first, I didn't think much of it. PR campaigns could be demanding, I'd seen her run herself ragged before. But this was different. The way she'd rush to her phone when it buzzed. The way she'd laugh a little too softly at messages she never shared. The way her perfume lingered when she came home late, like she'd been somewhere more glamorous than an office. One night, she didn't come home until almost 2 a.m. I was sitting on the couch, laptop open, half working, half worrying. When she walked in, she jumped slightly, like she didn't expect me to be awake. "Hey," she said, hanging her coat. "You didn't have to wait up." "I wasn't," I lied. "Just finishing up some work." She smiled, tired but distant. "Big presentation tomorrow. I'll tell you all about it once it's over." But she never did. That week, I heard a new name for the first time, Ryan Vale. She mentioned him casually over breakfast. "Ryan's handling the client pitch now," she said, sipping her coffee. "He's incredible at reading people." I nodded, barely listening. At the time, Ryan was just another name in her work world. But as the days passed, he came up more and more. "Ryan says I should be more assertive in meetings. Ryan's got this new strategy that could double our accounts. Ryan invited the team out for drinks after work." It became a chorus, Ryan this, Ryan that. I laughed about it once, joking, should I be jealous of this Ryan guy? She rolled her eyes. "Don't be ridiculous, Ethan. He's just confident, that's all. Maybe you could learn something from him." It was said playfully, maybe even without intent, but it hit harder than it should have. From that night on, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Her tone when she talked to me, colder, clipped, like I was an interruption. The way she'd tidy up before leaving for work, checking her reflection twice. The fact that she'd started locking her phone, something she never used to do. One evening, I made dinner early. I wanted us to have a night in, just us, like we used to. She came home late again, and by then the food had gone cold. "You didn't have to cook," she said, setting down her bag. "I wanted to," I replied. "It's been a while since we had a night together." She gave me a small, distracted smile. "Ethan, I'm just exhausted. Work's insane lately." "Then maybe you should take a break. You've been working late almost every night." Her eyes flickered, annoyance flashing beneath the fatigue. "You don't understand. This is how people grow, Ethan. You can't just stay comfortable forever." "I'm not comfortable," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm content. There's a difference." She didn't answer. She just brushed past me and disappeared into the bedroom. That was the first time I realized silence could feel heavier than words. Mr. Howard noticed the tension before I said anything. He was sitting on his porch one Sunday morning, a blanket over his knees, a cup of tea cooling beside him. I'd stopped by to check on him, but he was always more perceptive than I wanted him to be. "You look tired," he said, squinting at me. "Just work," I lied. He snorted. "No, it's not. You've got the look of a man trying to hold sand in his hands. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips away. I tried to laugh it off, but he leaned forward, his voice softening. Don't lose yourself trying to hold on to someone who's already let go. The words stayed with me for days. I didn't want to believe they were true. I wanted to believe Lena still loved me, just buried beneath stress, ambition, and fatigue. But hope, I was learning, can be the cruelest illusion. The next few weeks blurred into quiet unease. We still shared the same bed, but it felt like we were worlds apart. Her side of the mattress stayed cold most nights. When she was home, she was on her phone, typing quickly, screen tilted away from me. I told myself not to snoop, not to let suspicion poison me. But suspicion doesn't need permission, it grows on its own. Sometimes, I'd hear her in the other room, whispering on the phone. Once, I caught her saying, "No, he doesn't know. He never asks." My heart sank, but I forced myself to believe it was work-related. It had to be. Then came the trip. She said she was flying out for a 3-day conference in Chicago. I offered to drop her off at the airport, but she refused, saying her team was carpooling. The night before she left, she kissed me lightly and said, "You're too good to me, Ethan." Something about the way she said it felt final. I spent those 3 days in quiet denial, convincing myself I was imagining everything. I even called Mr. Howard and joked that maybe I was just becoming paranoid. He chuckled. Maybe. But sometimes paranoia is just intuition you're too kind to trust. When she returned, she looked radiant, too radiant for someone who'd been at a corporate conference. I noticed a faint bruise near her collarbone, barely visible beneath her blouse. Rough trip? I asked carefully. She froze for a split second. Oh, yeah. One of the lanyards at the event rubbed against me. Weird, right? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That night, when she showered, I sat in the living room staring at her unlocked laptop. My fingers hovered over it. I told myself I wasn't that kind of man. That trust meant more than my fear. So I didn't open it. I wish I had. The distance grew until it was unbearable. She stopped saying, "I love you." She stopped asking about my day. When she smiled, it was the polite smile she gave strangers. I tried to reach her. I planned a small weekend getaway, hoping maybe we could reset. When I showed her the booking confirmation, she sighed and said, "Ethan, I can't just take time off on a whim. You know how hard I've worked to get here." "I'm not asking for much," I said quietly. "Just a few days. For us." She closed her laptop, her tone sharp. "Us? Ethan, everything I'm doing is for us. You think I like staying late every night? I'm building a future here. Maybe if you were a little more ambitious, you'd understand that." The words cut deep, not because they were cruel, but because part of me believed them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her tone, her words, the faint irritation when she looked at me. I wondered when I had stopped being her partner and became her burden. A week later, it happened. The small, gutting moment that shattered whatever hope I had left. Lena had gone to shower after work, her phone left charging on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a notification, "Ryan Vale." I didn't mean to look. It just happened. My eyes caught the preview before I could turn away. "He still believes you, doesn't he?" My chest went cold. I stood there for a full minute, the words blurring in my vision. Every late night, every lie, every distant smile suddenly made sense. When she came back into the room, I was still standing there, staring at the dark screen. She looked at me, confused, then followed my gaze. "Ethan," she said softly, almost warningly. "Don't." But it was too late. The silence that followed was louder than any confession. And in that silence, something inside me began to break, not with anger, but with understanding. I realized then that love doesn't always end in fire. Sometimes it dies in whispers. And hers had been fading long before I noticed. When I finally confronted her, I wasn't angry. Just empty. It was late. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. She was sitting at the dining table, scrolling through her phone with that detached calm she wore lately. I stood there for a long time, watching her, rehearsing 100 different ways to begin. In the end, all I could manage was, "Who is Ryan to you?" Her fingers froze mid-scroll. Slowly, she looked up. Her expression wasn't shocking or guilty. It was, tired. "I was wondering when you'd ask," she said softly. That answer told me everything. "I saw the message," I said. "He still believes you, doesn't he?" "What does that mean, Lena?" She sighed, setting her phone down as if this was a conversation she'd already had in her head a dozen times. "It means I've been honest with myself, Ethan. Something I should have done a long time ago." "Honest?" My voice cracked despite me trying to stay calm. "You've been lying to me for months." "I didn't lie," she said. "I just stopped pretending." Her tone wasn't cruel, but the words cut like a blade. "I tried to keep my composure, to salvage something. After everything we've been through, your grandfather, your job, every sacrifice, I thought." She interrupted quietly, almost gently. "I know. You've done a lot for me. You've been good to me. But, Ethan, I can't be held back anymore." I stared at her. "Held back?" "Yes." She looked me dead in the eye. "You're comfortable, Ethan. You're steady, dependable. But I need more. I want to grow, to live a bigger life. Ryan understands that. He pushes me." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "You're saying I was never enough?" Her lips parted, but she didn't answer. That silence said more than words ever could. I nodded slowly, a hollow laugh escaping before I could stop it. "You know what's funny? I thought love was about building together. Turns out it's just about finding someone who can climb faster than you." She looked down, as if the table was more interesting than my pain. "I'm sorry, Ethan. But it's not working anymore." The divorce papers came a week later. She moved out that same weekend, taking half the furniture and most of what we'd built. Technically, everything was under her name. I'd let it be that way back when love made me generous. She didn't even pack everything herself. Movers came, efficient and detached, carrying boxes labeled living room and bedroom like they were just pieces of a life that didn't matter. I stood in the doorway, watching her direct them. She barely looked at me. When she finally did, it was to say, "It'll be easier this way." Easier for who? By the time the last box was gone, the house felt like a skeleton, empty, echoing, cold. I stayed there that night anyway, sitting on the bare floor, surrounded by the ghosts of laughter and the faint outline of furniture that once filled our space. It didn't take long for the world to see them together. Photos started appearing online, Lena and Ryan at a charity gala, at dinner, on a yacht. The captions were all glowing, "A power couple in the making." I stared at those pictures longer than I should have. She looked radiant, alive in a way she hadn't been in months. He stood beside her, confident, polished, the kind of man she thought she needed. People congratulated her in the comments. Her friends cheered her on. Some of our mutual acquaintances unfollowed me quietly, as if betrayal was contagious. I didn't post anything. I didn't even respond when people reached out to check on me. What could I say? That I was the man she left behind after I'd emptied my savings to save her family? No one would understand that kind of silence. I left the house and moved into a small apartment across town. One bedroom, peeling wallpaper, a leaky faucet. It was all I could afford after the settlement. I spent most nights working late, anything to drown out the noise in my head. I told myself I was rebuilding, but really, I was surviving. Until the call came. It was Mr. Howard. Or rather, the hospital. He'd collapsed at home, heart attack. I dropped everything and drove straight there. Seeing him in that hospital bed broke something in me all over again. The old man who had once called me son now lay fragile and pale, tubes and wires keeping him alive. When Lena arrived, she looked surprised to see me. "Ethan," she said softly. "You didn't have to." "I know," I cut in. "But I did." She nodded, eyes flicking away, guilt briefly crossing her face before she smoothed it over. The doctor came in later with an update: surgery was needed. Costly. Insurance wouldn't cover all of it. Without thinking, I offered to pay what I could. It wasn't much, but it helped cover the difference. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd been left behind was now saving the life of the family who had cast him aside. Mr. Howard recovered slowly, and in his brief moments of lucidity, he'd squeeze my hand and whisper, "You've still got heart, son. Don't lose it." I didn't tell him that I already had. Weeks passed. I started to rebuild a semblance of normal life. Work. Sleep. Repeat. Until one evening, fate decided to twist the knife a little deeper. I was at a downtown cafe, grabbing coffee before heading home. As I waited in line, I heard laughter from a nearby table. It was her voice, Lena's unmistakable laugh, the one that used to make my worst days bearable. I froze. She was sitting with a few of her friends, dressed elegantly as always. And next to her, of course, was Ryan. I should have walked away. But I didn't. I lingered by the counter, pretending to wait for my order while every word they said carved into me like glass. One of her friends was teasing her about her upgrade. Lena laughed. "Oh, please." Ethan was sweet, but he could never match Ryan's world. He's simple. Safe. You can't live off love forever. The table erupted in laughter. My heart didn't break, it solidified. Every trace of warmth I'd held on to turned cold, hard, unrecognizable. I walked out without my coffee. The air outside was sharp, biting. I barely felt it. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, staring at the steering wheel, breathing slowly, measured breaths until the shaking stopped. It wasn't sadness anymore. It wasn't a heartbreak. It was something quieter. Meaner. I realized that night that people like Lena don't understand love until it costs them something. And I was done being the one who paid. That night, I went home, poured a glass of whiskey, and sat by the window watching the city lights. Each flicker of neon reflected off the glass felt like a reminder of everything I'd lost, and everything I still could take back. I thought of Mr. Howard, still recovering, the only person from that life who'd never turned his back on me. I thought of Lena's laughter, her words, the look in her eyes when she told me I was comfortable. Maybe I had been. Maybe I'd built my world around comfort, around faith, around believing that good things came to those who loved deeply and worked hard. But that night, something shifted. The part of me that begged, that hoped, that forgave, he was gone. What replaced him was colder. Sharper. Focused. I didn't know what the plan was yet. I didn't know how or when. But I knew this much. She had taken everything from me, my home, my pride, my peace. And I was going to take something back. I raised my glass to the reflection in the window. The man staring back wasn't the same one who sold his car to pay for her family's surgery. He wasn't the man who believed love could fix anything. He was something else now. Something forged in betrayal and quiet resolve. I whispered to the empty room, the city noise swallowing my voice. That night, I buried the man who begged for love, and began building the man who takes it back. I disappeared for a while. Not physically, I still went to work, still paid my bills, still visited Mr. Howard, but I vanished from the story everyone else was telling. I stopped answering congratulatory messages. I stopped pretending I'd be okay. Instead, I moved like a person who'd learned the value of silence, careful, deliberate, patient. First, I rebuilt myself the only way I knew how, by making things. I started a company. It was small at first, one rented desk in a co-working space, a second-hand laptop, a whiteboard scrawled with sketches. I called it Carter Dynamics. The name sounded modest. That was the point. Modesty was good camouflage. I used skills I'd long set aside. Prototypes I'd done for fun in my spare time became products. A water-saving pump, a compact HVAC regulator, a modular mounting system that made industrial installations cheaper and faster. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that screamed for attention. But they solved problems. They saved money. They were the sort of things procurement officers loved. The first contract came through a friend of a friend, a municipal supplier who'd once been burned by Vale Engineering, Ryan's firm. Vale had promised low bids and fast delivery. They delivered late and over budget, after slipping in change orders and consulting fees that seemed to vanish into ghost accounts. My contact needed a reliable alternative. He wanted someone who did the work honestly. He wanted me. I took the job. I underbid just enough to win, not to destroy but to prove I could deliver. We finished the job on time. We finished it under budget. The client wrote an internal memo praising the efficiency. That memo, one piece of boring paper, was the seed. Word spread. Tiny projects became larger ones. An ambitious procurement officer at a utility company recommended me. A local developer wanted a pilot for a smart metering hook. Each success was a marble placed in a pocket I was slowly filling. With every marble, my confidence grew. With every marble, Ryan's shadow at the edges of the city shrank. Along the way, I began to notice patterns. Contracts that looked clean had layers. Invoices duplicated across projects. Subcontractors who never got paid. Emails with vague, facilitation, line items. Once, during a routine QA call, a plant manager mentioned that Vale Engineering always won certain bids because the right people were comfortable with them. Those words sent me home with a jar of unease and a box of receipts. I'd learned to read systems for flaws. Engineers see things that others miss. So I started looking for inconsistencies the way I'd once hunted faulty tolerances on a circuit board. I scraped public filings. I reviewed procurement notices. I asked small, casual questions to contractors who'd worked with both firms. People talked if you gave them the right place to speak. I listened. A young project manager at Vale, a quiet woman named Priya, slipped. She left her laptop unlocked at a bar once. She didn't know me. She just wanted to drown a bad day. I noticed. I didn't pry. Not then. But I remembered the name and the face. Months later, Priya resurfaced in my inbox with a single line, "I don't want to be firewood for that place. Meet me." She sent a file attached, a messy bundle of internal invoices, stamped approvals, and emails that didn't quite line up. It wasn't explosive on its face. It was tedious. But the discrepancy was obvious when you knew where to look: identical invoices submitted under different project codes, unusual payments routed through shell companies, signed approvals from people who were on vacation the week they approved things. A procurement officer's note: "Make it look clean." They're nervous. Another email: "Don't worry. We have arrangements in place." Arrangements. The word tasted like rust. I saved everything. I cataloged it. I copied it to an encrypted drive and printed crucial pages. I didn't show it to anyone. Not yet. I wanted to be sure. At night, I sat with Mr. Howard and pretended to be normal. He would grin like a man who'd seen storms but believed in clear weather. "You're doing good, son," he said once, his voice weak but steady. "Don't let bitterness take the better of you. There's still a life waiting." His gratitude was a trap. It nearly convinced me to stop. The man who had once told me not to lose myself was now the reason I almost did. I nearly put the files away. I almost let dignity be my leash. Then came the gala. Lena, of course, was there. It was a charity fundraiser for a museum she'd been working to support. Ryan was beside her, resplendent in a tux, clasping champagne like a tuba. They glided through the crowd, an exhibit of success. My plan had no place for impulse, but I wanted to see. To feel. To catalog what had been taken. She saw me, or rather, she saw the new life I'd started to build. She saw me in the crowd the way you see a photograph you don't mean to, sharp, then soft, then gone. She laughed at something Ryan said, then turned toward a group of friends and, with a voice I'd once adored, said loud enough for a few nearby people to hear, "Ethan was sweet, but he could never match Ryan's world. He's simple. Safe. You can't live off love forever." The laughter rang like a bell. But this time it didn't sound like her joy. It sounded like an accusation. Like a verdict. I walked out. I almost drove away. Instead, I sat in my car, fingers curled around the steering wheel, feeling that old warmth hardened into a different shape. The man who'd once begged for love was gone. The man sitting in that car cataloged the words, stored them like fuel, and filed the memory for later. Back at the office, the files waited. Priya had given me access to more than invoices. There were internal memos hinting at bribery, expense reports with line items paid to offshore consultants who were shell companies in Belize, emails congratulating Ryan for taking care of the right people. I dug deeper. I cross-checked vendor names with public registries. I traced partial wire transfers. I found a pattern of kickbacks routed through a network of small firms that, on paper, provided consulting services for permits and expedited approvals. This was no garden variety incompetence. It was a system built to siphon. And the more I uncovered, the more I realized how many people it hurt: honest contractors who were squeezed out, city departments that paid inflated rates, employees who lost their jobs when Vail failed to deliver on promises made to secure contracts. That realization changed the internal calculus. This wasn't just personal. It was structural. The desire for revenge found its righteous cousin, justice. I forged alliances the way a builder gets subcontractors. I spoke quietly with procurement officers who'd been pressured. I met a compliance officer from a partner company who'd lost sleep over sudden remunerations that never made it into ledgers. I bought dinners. I returned favors. I made sure they trusted me. Trust, I'd learned, is currency. Sometimes, I slipped. A week after Mr. Howard's surgery follow-up, I sat in a small diner, exhausted and half convinced to walk away. The old man had squeezed my hand and said, "You don't need to break yourself to be right." His gratitude had nearly convinced me to put the files in a drawer and live the quiet life. But I saw a photo in a paper later, Lena at another gala, laughing with Ryan, her eyes bright, and something in me snapped back into focus. This wasn't about bitterness, I told myself. It was about consequence. People who hurt others, even gently, casually, needed to learn the cost. I wrote the email that night. Anonymous. Clinical. It contained a redacted dossier, timelines, scanned invoices, cross-references, a step-by-step showing how payments moved from Vail to Shell vendors and who authorized them. I included a note to the investigative reporter at the city paper, the one who'd once done a piece on municipal corruption and had a nose for oddities. I didn't send it from my account. I used onion routing and throwaway emails. I sent it from a place that could not be traced back to my apartment, to my laptop, to my name. That email hung in the digital air like a stone, waiting. I told myself, honestly, that I wasn't out for vengeance alone. I wanted to expose the rot. But I also wanted Lena to feel the consequences of her choices. I wanted the world she'd chosen to be messy on her doorstep. I quoted her words in my head often, "You can't live off love forever." I wrote a line of my own and repeated it until it felt like a prayer, "You once said I wasn't enough. Let's see how much is left of your more when I'm done." A few days later, the story ran. It was measured and sharp. Investigative. The headline suggested nothing grandiose, allegations of procurement irregularities at Vale Engineering prompt inquiry, but the details were damning. Names. Dates. Summaries. The paper's email box is filled with anonymous tips. A municipal auditor opened a file. Regulators sent a letter. Ryan's phone started to ring in a way I knew he wouldn't like. When Lena called me later that night, her voice thin with something I couldn't name, I didn't pick up. I sat at my desk, the city lights bleeding through the blinds, and watched the ripples I'd made spread outward. I felt the old, softer pain of loss and the new, colder satisfaction of a plan begun and executed. This wasn't the end. It was the pivot. I'd lighted a fuse. The rest would be method and patience. I prepared for the moment when consequences turned from paper into reality, when meetings would be cancelled, when contracts would be put on hold, when people who'd laughed at me would have to answer for the ledger. I slept that night with a file open on my screen and the echo of Mr. Howard's whisper in my ear, "Don't let bitterness take the better of you." I promised myself he'd be proud, whatever that meant now. My hand closed around a future I'd built from broken parts. And somewhere in the city, Lena's laughter had begun to sound less bright. When the article first broke, Ryan called it a hit job. He went on the local business channel, all charm and cologne, and laughed it off. "Competitors get jealous when you grow fast," he said. "We're focused on innovation, not gossip." But gossip spreads faster than truth. Within a week, city investigators froze 2 of Vale Engineering's contracts. Within 2, half their suppliers stopped answering emails. The audit reports followed, the kind printed in gray legal font, heavy and slow, the kind that doesn't scream but kills quietly. By the end of the month, investors wanted out. Ryan's board suspended him, pending clarification. Clients issued public statements about evaluating partnerships. Every word was a small death. I watched it unfold like someone watching dominoes fall exactly the way they were drawn to. Each step matched the pattern I'd mapped. Not fast. Not explosive. Just steady. Lena stayed quiet online for a while, then her posts changed. No more glittering galas. No more photos of power couples. Just quotes about resilience, finding peace, lessons learned. Then even those stopped. I didn't celebrate. I worked. The contracts I'd secured with Carter Dynamics doubled. When people needed reliable engineering, they came to me. Clients who'd once called me too small now used the words trustworthy and clean. I accepted their praise with polite restraint. They didn't know how much those words cost. By spring, Vale Engineering was finished. The city cancelled its master contract. Investigations found falsified invoices, bribed officials, missing funds. Ryan was forced to resign before indictment. His photo, once confident, sharp, appeared beside headlines about ethical violations. I remember staring at his face on the news. He looked different. Smaller. Like the light that once surrounded him had been turned off. I didn't leak a second thing. I didn't need to. Once a system cracks, it devours itself. Then came the piece of news I hadn't expected. Lena's name appeared in a press statement. Lena Carter has resigned from LMR Public Relations to avoid conflict of interest arising from her association with Vale Engineering. That was the official line. The quieter one was simpler: no one wanted to work with her. Her clients walked away. Tainted by association, someone whispered at a conference I attended. I felt no triumph. Just completion. The city moved on. People forget fast when scandals are replaced by new ones. But the people inside them don't. Mr. Howard fell ill again that summer. The man had been through more surgeries than he deserved, but he still greeted me with that half-smile. "Ethan," he said, "they tell me you're doing well." "I'm keeping busy," I answered. He chuckled, coughed, then said, "You always were better when your hands were full." I visited him often. I told him about new designs, about how his old stories still helped me think straight. He'd squeeze my hand, a fragile gesture that meant everything. One night, late in August, his monitor began to scream. Nurses weren't nearby, the ward was short-staffed. His chest stopped moving. I didn't think so. I just moved. I climbed onto the bed, started compressions. My palms ached against his ribs, rhythm steady, 30 counts, 2 breaths, 30 counts. I kept going until the nurses burst in and took over. One of them shouted for adrenaline. When the doctors finally steadied him, one of them turned to me and said, "You saved his life." Another minute and he would have been gone. I just nodded. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat. The old man blinked, weak but alive. He mouthed, "Thank you." A local reporter wrote a small story about it 2 days later. Engineer performs life-saving CPR on elderly patient. They mentioned my company in passing. The headline didn't matter. What mattered was that it reached the people it needed to. Lena's mother called me first. She cried on the phone. "You're a good man, Ethan. We should never have doubted that." Then her brother. Then others from the family I hadn't heard from in a year. Gratitude can be its own kind of echo, it finds you even when you're not listening for it. Mr. Howard, once recovered, gripped my hand again and whispered, "You did right, son. Not just for me. For yourself." I smiled, not knowing what to say. Months later, autumn settled in. The city's air turned crisp, the leaves burned red, and for the first time in a long while, I felt still. I'd bought a modest house near the river, far from the noise. Carter Dynamics had grown into a firm with a small team, 4 engineers, 2 interns, 1 quiet accountant who always brought cookies on Fridays. I was at peace, or something like it, when Lena found me. It was early evening. I just parked outside the office when I saw her standing by the entrance. A wind moved through her hair, she was thinner now, eyes heavy, dressed in gray instead of her usual bold colors. "Ethan," she said softly. I didn't speak. I just waited. "I heard about what you did for Grandpa," she continued. "They said you saved him." Her voice cracked, "I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't have to," I said. She nodded, biting her lip. "I know I hurt you. I made choices I thought were right at the time, but I was wrong. About everything. Ryan, he lied to me, used me. He's gone. Everyone's gone." I watched her words drift like smoke. For a moment, the image of the girl I once met in college flickered, the one who'd eaten ramen with me in the rain. Then it faded. She stepped closer. "I made a mistake, Ethan. Can we start over?" Her eyes searched mine, desperate, waiting for the man who used to fix everything. I let the silence stretch between us until it hummed. Then I smiled faintly, calm and final. "I already did," I said. "Just not with you." Her face froze. She didn't understand at first. Then she did. I turned away and walked toward the river path, the same place we'd once talked about dreams. Behind me, her quiet sobs mixed with the sound of the wind. For a long time, I watched the water move, steady, cold, mercilessly clean. Revenge, I realized, doesn't roar. It whispers. It ends not with fire but with stillness. And in that stillness, I finally felt what I'd been chasing since the day she handed me those papers. Freedom. The morning was quiet when I visited Mr. Howard's grave. The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking the city, the skyline faint through a low mist. The kind of day that looked like the world was still deciding whether to wake up or go back to sleep. I brought lilies. He'd once said they reminded him of his late wife, strong enough to grow anywhere, even in bad soil. I knelt by the headstone and brushed a few leaves aside. The granite was cool under my fingers. His name, etched deep and clean, looked almost new. I kept my promise, I said softly. Took care of things. I took care of her. The wind moved through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called out, one sharp note that faded into silence. I think you were right, I went on. Some people have to lose everything to learn what love means. I set the flowers down, aligning the stems neatly, and stayed a while, long enough for the quiet to feel familiar again. The city below hummed, unaware, still busy trading new dreams for old ones. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the polished marble, older now, sharper around the edges, but calm. The kind of calm that comes when there's nothing left to prove. Lena hadn't called again. I doubted she ever would. The world she'd chosen had finally taught her what loyalty costs, and what it means when it's gone. I walked down the path, sunlight beginning to pierce through the mist, my footsteps steady against the gravel. She wanted a man who could conquer the world, I murmured, almost smiling. I just didn't tell her I'd conquer hers first.